You know what's absolutely wild? When someone truly wakes up, something shifts inside them that's almost impossible to explain to people who haven't experienced it. They suddenly develop this razor-sharp ability to smell lies from a mile away. And I'm not talking about some weird psychic power or mystical mumbo-jumbo. This is something far more real, far more raw, and rooted in how consciousness actually works when all the junk gets stripped away. Most folks think catching a liar takes serious detective work, right? You've got to analyze their story, check the facts, compare what they said yesterday to what they're saying today, look for holes in their logic. Sure, that stuff matters. But what I'm talking about works on a completely different frequency. It's more like how you instantly know when someone hits a sour note in a song, or when a picture just looks wrong somehow. You don't sit there thinking about it. You just feel it in your bones. So here's the million-dollar question. What actually changes when someone wakes up that flips this switch? Why can someone who's seen through their own garbage instantly recognize when others are swimming in theirs? Let me break it down for you. Every single act of deception, whether someone's deliberately lying through their teeth or just fooling themselves without knowing it, creates this crack inside them. There's a gap between the mask they're wearing and what's actually real underneath. They're putting on a show, playing a character, spinning a tale that doesn't line up with reality. And this crack, this split, puts out a specific vibe that awakened people pick up on instantly. Now here's the kicker. Why can they sense it so fast? Because they've gotten up close and personal with that exact same vibe in themselves. The whole journey of waking up forces you to stare down your own lies, rip off your own masks, and face all the ways you've been playing pretend. You've had to cut through the stories you tell yourself, the image you desperately try to project, all the ways you fake being someone you're not. Once you've seen your own game for what it is, you can't unsee it when others are playing the same tired game. Think about it like this. Imagine spending years learning how magic tricks work, studying every technique, understanding all the sneaky ways magicians mess with your head. Once you know the secrets, you can watch any magician and immediately spot how they're fooling everyone. Not because you're sitting there analyzing moves, but because you recognize the setup, the pattern, the little tells that give away the illusion. The awakened person has done this with the ultimate illusion, the biggest trick of all, the fake separate self, the ego. They've watched how it builds itself up, how it keeps itself going, how it spins elaborate stories to prove it exists. And because they've demolished their own ego's lies, they instantly catch when another ego is running the same con. But there's something even deeper happening here. When you wake up, you settle into what I'd call pure presence, raw awareness without all the constant noise of judging, interpreting, and storytelling. From this place of stillness, you see things exactly as they are without your own baggage twisting everything. Most people never see reality straight on. They see their thoughts about reality. Everything gets filtered through this thick fog of beliefs, expectations, hopes, and fears. Someone tells them something. And before they've even fully listened, their mind is already spinning it, judging it, shoving it into their existing story about that person, themselves, the world. But the awakened person has learned to hang out in that space before all the spinning starts. They can hear something without immediately grinding it through their mental machinery. They can watch without labeling everything instantly. They can be present to what's actually happening without immediately deciding what it means. And in that naked seeing, lies become obvious, because lies are always a twist away from what simply is. Let me paint you a picture. When someone's lying to your face, there's almost always this tiny mismatch between their words and their energy. The words might sound smooth, but their body, their voice, the look in their eyes, something feels slightly off. Most people miss this completely because they're listening to words while running them through their own filter of what they want to believe or what scares them. They're thinking, does this fit what I hope is true? Does this threaten me? And in all that mental chaos, they miss the simple truth of what's actually going down right in front of them. The awakened person, though, they're quiet inside. They're not running that endless internal commentary. So they catch the whole picture at once. the words and the energy and the body language and everything else all together. And if something doesn't match up, they see it instantly, not because they're hunting for it, but because it jumps out against the background of clear awareness, like a neon sign in the dark. This is why you really can't trick someone who's genuinely awake. Not because they're paranoid or suspicious, actually the opposite. It's because they're so present, so tuned in, so free from their own agenda that they simply see what's there. And what's there when someone's being fake always has that telltale quality of being split inside, performing, hiding something. Now let me make something crystal clear. This ability to spot lies isn't the same as being judgmental or bitter. Actually, being cynical blocks clear seeing. The cynic expects everyone to lie, assumes the worst in every situation, and ends up seeing deception even where it doesn't exist. They're filtering everything through their belief that everyone's dishonest. And that filter actually blinds them to what's real. The awakened person has no such filter. They don't expect lies, but they're not naive either. They simply see what's there. If someone's being real, they see that. If someone's faking it, they see that too. There's no layer of judgment about whether the lie should or shouldn't be happening. Just clear seeing of what is. And here's something fascinating. When an awakened person catches someone lying, they often don't make a scene about it. They don't need to expose, prove it, make the liar look bad. They simply see it and adjust how they understand the situation. They recognize that the person is trapped in their own confusion, fear, and patterns, and they feel compassion for that even while seeing straight through it. This is totally different from how most people react to lies. Most people, when they think they've caught someone in a lie, lose their minds. They feel betrayed, furious, righteous. They want to confront, expose, punish. But all that drama is coming from their own ego feeling threatened or insulted. The awakened person's ego isn't calling the shots anymore. So there's no need for all that noise. Just clear seeing and whatever response makes sense. Let me tell you about another layer of this. The awakened person can spot not just deliberate lies, but the lies people tell themselves. And this is way more common and way more interesting. Most people aren't consciously lying most of the time. What they're doing is believing their own stories, their own excuses, their own carefully built self-image. They're fooling themselves first, then broadcasting that self-deception outward. For example, someone might swear they're acting from love when they're really acting from fear. Or they might believe they're being generous when they're actually trying to control. Or they might think they're searching for truth when they're just reinforcing what they already believe. These kinds of self-deceptions are everywhere, running like background programs in almost everyone. Most people never catch them because seeing through them would blow up their entire sense of who they are. But the awakened person has already torn down their own self-image. They've already seen through their own excuses and justifications. So when they bump into someone else's self-deception, they recognize it instantly. Not because they're judging, but because they know that territory intimately. They've walked that path themselves. Self-deception has this particular quality that's really distinct. It's rigid, brittle, defensive, unwilling to look at certain things straight on. When someone's caught in self-deception, they can't afford to be truly open or flexible because that might let reality slip in and shatter their carefully protected illusion. So there's always this quality of guardedness, of protecting something precious, of keeping certain areas locked away from examination. The awakened person feels this instantly. They're like a tuning fork that vibrates with authenticity and goes dead silent around pretense. They don't need to think it through or analyze it. They simply feel the difference between someone who's available to reality and someone who's defending against it, like their life depends on it. Now, I want to talk about something that might sound backwards. The awakened person can spot deception instantly, yes. But they also see that deception itself isn't really the problem. The problem is being stuck in deception, believing it, being unable to see through it. Deception, like everything else in human experience, is just part of the dance, part of how consciousness plays with itself. Actually, the awakened person knows they still engage in certain forms of everyday deception themselves. They might not tell someone the brutal truth if it would be cruel or inappropriate. They might play along with social games that involve some amount of pretense. The difference is they're conscious of it. They're not fooled by their own performance. They know when they're wearing a mask and exactly why, and they can rip it off whenever they choose. This is huge. Most people are completely unconscious of their masks. They think the mask is their actual face. They identify totally with their performance. But the awakened person knows they're performing, knows they're wearing masks, and there's a lightness to it, a sense of play rather than desperate survival. Let me hit you with another angle. One thing that happens in awakening is you become incredibly sensitive to energy, not in some woo-woo mystical way, but in the simple sense of feeling the quality of presence people bring. Every human being operates at a certain frequency, puts out a certain vibe. And this energy is always honest, even when their words are complete fiction. You can feel when someone is genuinely at peace versus faking calmness. You can feel when someone is truly confident versus covering up insecurity. You can feel when someone is actually present versus checked out and distracted. These aren't things you think about, they're things you sense directly, the way you sense hot or cold. The person who hasn't woken up is usually too caught up in their own internal storm to sense others clearly. Their own anxiety, desires, and fears create so much noise that they can't pick up the subtle signals others are broadcasting. But the awakened person, established, shared in inner silence, can sense these energies with stunning clarity. And when someone's energy doesn't match their words, when there's a gap between what they're projecting and what they're actually putting out, it's obvious immediately. Here's another wild aspect. The awakened person often senses deception not from what someone is saying, but from what they're not saying. There's a quality to omission, to strategic silence, to carefully avoided topics that creates this energetic hole in the conversation. The awakened person feels these blank spots instantly because their awareness is so complete that what's missing is just as noticeable as what's there. Most people only notice what's in front of them. They listen to the words, the story, the information being shared. But the awakened person also notices what isn't there, what's being carefully stepped around, what's being unconsciously dodged. And often what's not being said screams louder than what is. Now you might be thinking this sounds exhausting. If you can see everyone's lies all the time, doesn't that make life depressing? And the answer is absolutely not. The opposite, actually. Because when you can see clearly, you can choose how to respond. You're not being manipulated without knowing it. You're not getting pulled into other people's drama unconsciously. You're free to engage or walk away, all with complete awareness. Plus, when you can see through deception clearly, you can also see what's underneath it. You can see the fear driving the lie, the insecurity fueling the pretense, the hurt hiding behind the mask. And seeing this, compassion rises naturally, not pity, but recognition that this person is suffering, trapped in their own web, doing the best they can with whatever level of awareness they currently have. There's also another layer worth exploring. The awakened person can spot deception in systems and structures, not just in individuals. They can see when institutions operate on false assumptions, when ideologies rest on unexamined beliefs, when entire societies maintain collective illusions. Most people swallow the official story, the mainstream narrative, the way things are supposed to be. They don't dig deeper because it might get uncomfortable or threatening. But the awakened person has already been through the discomfort of questioning everything about their own reality. So they're comfortable continuing to question, to probe, to look beneath the surface of collective stories, just as they've looked beneath their personal story. And what they see is that much of what society calls truth is actually agreed upon fiction. Money has value because we agree it does. Borders are real because we agree they are. Status matters because we agree it matters. These are collective deceptions, useful stories that let society function, but stories nonetheless. The awakened person sees them as such. They can participate when appropriate, but they're never fooled. This clarity extends to spiritual stuff too. The awakened person can spot spiritual deception, spiritual materialism, fake teachers with brutal ease. Why? Because they know what authentic awakening looks like, feels like, sounds like. They know it in themselves. So they can recognize it or the lack of it in others immediately. There are tons of people claiming to be enlightened, performing the role of spiritual guru, saying all the right words and making all the right gestures, but actually operating from ego, from craving power or admiration or control. The spiritual seeker who hasn't woken up often can't tell the difference. They're dazzled by the performance, the confidence, the charisma, the big claims. But the genuinely awakened person sees straight through it like looking through glass. Let me loop back to fundamental. The reason the awakened person can spot deception so easily isn't ultimately about having some special power or developing some special skill. It's about the removal of obstruction. It's about clearing away the fog that normally clouds perception. When your own mind isn't constantly generating illusions, you can see clearly when others are generating them. Regular consciousness is like looking through a filthy window. You're viewing the world through layers of conditioning, belief, fear, desire, and you see those layers as much as or more than you see what's actually outside. Awakened consciousness is like a spotless window. The layers have been wiped clean, and you see what's there with shocking clarity. This is why awakening gets described as becoming like a child again, not in being naive or gullible, but in perceiving directly without all the accumulated layers of interpretation. A child hasn't learned yet to deceive themselves or accept others' deceptions as normal. They see clearly until they're taught not to, until society trains them to accept the everyday lies that hold everything together. The awakened person has unlearned that training. They've returned to direct perception. But now, with wisdom and understanding the child lacks, they can see clearly and also comprehend what they're seeing. They can spot deception and also understand why it's happening, what purpose it serves, what fear or desire is powering it. And here's the beautiful part. As you become more rooted in clear seeing, as you get more familiar with the difference between authenticity and pretense, you naturally attract more authenticity into your life. Not because you're rejecting fake people, but because there's a natural resonance. Real recognizes real. Truth vibrates with truth. So how do spiritually awake people spot deception instantly? They see it the same way you see. E-colors or hear sounds. It's direct perception without their own agendas and illusions blocking the view. They feel it in the quality of energy, the match or mismatch between words and presence. They sense it in what's not being said as much as what is. They recognize the patterns because they've demolished those same patterns in themselves. This capacity isn't something you earn like a trophy. It's something that gets revealed when the garbage gets cleared out. It's your natural state of awareness running without the distortions of ego and fear. And it's available to anyone willing to look honestly at themselves, to question their own lies, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, to rest in simple presence without all the noise. The path to this clarity is the path of brutal self-honesty, of ruthless self-examination, of willingness to see your own masks and games and performances. And as you see through your own deceptions, as you become more established in simple authenticity, you naturally develop this capacity to see clearly when others are operating from deception. It's not a weapon you use. It's a clarity you embody. And in that clarity, there's incredible freedom, not just freedom from being deceived by others, but freedom from deceiving yourself. And that freedom is the greatest gift awakening offers, the ability to live in reality as it actually is, without the constant overlay of illusion twisting everything. This is what it means to be awake, to see clearly, to live authentically, and to recognize immediately when you or others are departing from that clarity and authenticity. Not as judgment, but as simple fact. Not as a problem, but as information. Not as a reason to separate, but as an opportunity for compassion and understanding. Thank you for listening.